Hello, welcome to the Senior Spotlight. This is podcast number 5. Welcome, Dr. Ferris, Dr. Moraes.
Thank you.
I just wanted to introduce you to, and we're going to talk about elder abuse and signs of elder abuse today. If you guys can introduce yourself, and you're from our Senior Advisor Board, and so welcome.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for asking me to come back. I'm Dr. Brian Ferris. I'm a vascular surgeon and general surgeon who's been practicing for over 20 years here in the Seattle metropolitan area.
Wonderful.
And I'm Dr. Alex Moraes. I'm a family practice physician. I'm a hospice medical director, and I've taken care of a number of nursing homes and experienced a lot of what you're talking about. I've been in practice, not to outdo Dr. Ferris, 27 years. So we've both seen a lot in our combined years.
Well, Concierge Care Advisors is so lucky to have you guys on our physician board and overseeing what we're doing in our practices and talking about this very important subject. So I would love to hear how you guys see with your patients, perhaps people that are being abused, and how we're going to categorize those, whether it's physical, neglect, financial. We see a lot more financial when we're dealing with the care and transitions of families, but really interested on what you guys see on your side as well.
Go ahead.
So the physical abuse is one of the things that we rarely see. Most of it is either hidden or it's quite obvious and easily reported whenever you see a strange bruise, something that falls out of context with a typical fall. You know, you see bruise marks around arms or in other areas that shouldn't be bruised. But I think a majority of what I see is either psychosocial abuse, meaning demeaning, being mean to them, not supporting their needs physically and mentally within the homes many times. But the other thing is the finances. The finances are really a struggle because when people claim to be, for example, the power of attorney, many times they're not.
Right.
And if they're just given the opportunity, next thing you know, that money's gone and it's hard to get back. So it's really a challenge, and you have to be very cautious for looking for it because people are very good at hiding any form of abuse.
Absolutely. There are times also, as you talked about, bruising on the body and stuff like that. Of course, with the elderly, we also see where people do bruise easy. And when doing transfers and things like that. So families get very, uptight about, oh gosh, my mom never had bruises before. And sometimes when you're transferring somebody that's 320 pounds or whatever, sometimes you're going to see that. But it's great to always err on the side of caution, right?
Yes.
Sure, absolutely. As an individual ages, and when they come into our world, they become our patients. We're caring for them. I think you have to really start breaking it down and say, well, what is abuse? And obviously there's the social abuses, whether it's situational, financial, etc. When they come into the hospital, there's always a safety net. And so from a hospital-based practice, I think there's just the opposite of, well, what did you do to my loved one? Because you're right, there's the bruises from a blood pressure cuff. There's the bruises from IVs and so on and so forth. And sometimes it's very shocking and alarming. But I think out in the community that would come into my practice on an ambulatory basis or come to the emergency room, it's not as common to see somebody that's been physically assaulted or that's clear. However, I think that there is a big divergence when you get into assisted care of what expectations are in terms of an individual's needs, how much attention they're getting, and what those expectations are. That's a very different and becomes almost somewhat adversarial situation. I think more commonly the problem becomes financial vulnerability, whether it's through the mail advertisements, social media, sales men and women, whether it's on an individual basis or an institutional basis. And so I think that they're just clearly they represent a very vulnerable population to social abuses, and financials, of course, the big one. Then there's always the interfamily relationships, and that's not to say that they are abusive, but it's hard, and it's not necessarily meant to be a negative thing, but it's wear and tear on that individual that can be difficult.
Mm-hmm. And it's difficult to see who has the best interest, right, for their parents.
Well, ultimately, it's their interest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I'm reminded by one of Alex's colleagues who gave me some personal advice many moons ago dealing with one of my parents to remind me what's important to them. And that's
Right.
always a great important
Mm-hmm.
question is,
Yeah.
if you don't know what it is, you have to ask, and that's hard to do. And if you're not in alignment, then you're opening up the discussion for diverging interests and who's really got whose interest at heart. So that just opens that can of worms.
And when sometimes we have seniors that are not aware, they have dementia, they aren't able to articulate what's going on. So sometimes that's hard as well because they can't verbalize what's going on.
The nursing homes, many times when those patients, there's two places I think you have to consider. You know, people that stay at home
Yeah.
have different areas of abuse that you have to be cautious for. And this is as a physician and as a mandated reporter. And for that, many times I'm looking at the care, what's being spent on patients, the interactions that I see in the office. Those are really important to kind of guide you whether there may be some abuse or not.
Sure.
Because many times what's played in the office is different than what occurs at home.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, you call for assistance of services to evaluate a little bit further. But in the nursing homes and in assisted living facilities, it's even more of a challenge because one of the areas of neglect that we never talk about and is when families come in sort of like a bull in a china shop.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is it makes everybody within the facility now pull back from care because they're afraid of being yelled at, screamed at. They're afraid
Accused
of
of
litigation
something
issuing,
missing.
being
Yep.
accused of
Mhm.
stealing.
Yep.
So what happens is now your family member isn't getting the care because you've come in and have instead of just being involved and supportive of the care, you know, they come in with they're a little abrasive at times,
Accusatory, maybe.
very accusatory.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that in itself, I've had some nice conversations with patients' families and said, here's what's happening.
Right.
You know, I think that you're going to get a much better level of care if you use the honey instead of the vinegar.
Mm-hmm.
And it really changes the dynamics of the nursing. And then all of a sudden they're like, wow, I'm getting great support. I'm getting calls. They're not fearful of me anymore. So that's one area of abuse that we never think about that we're responsible for in an unintentional way.
We see that where families say, "Oh, I don't want to complain because I don't want my mom or dad to get, bad care." And it's like, "Oh my gosh, we're so doing a disservice if someone cannot come with helpful criticism to fix something."
Absolutely.
If they're thinking there's going to be retribution for bad care.
Yeah,
right?
I think across the board, from a health perspective, whether it's aides, nurses, doctors, therapists, their favorite patients and families are the ones that they have the honey relationship with. I mean, it's obvious, but
Yes.
it's clearly forgotten, and it's a really, really good point. But I think a lot of that is also driven by when does that first conversation happen for that individual who then becomes the patient in need, whether it's their spouse, their family, or friend.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's family.
Yeah.
Usually these conversations haven't occurred, and whatever that reason is, we're lucky in that our profession has given us the privilege of having a window into many individuals' lives, right? And that's private and so on and so forth, but it's still a lot of experience. And they don't necessarily come in and say, well, here's what happened, and she didn't say this and didn't do that, and I've been mad at them for 20 years. But there's some story there, and sometimes you hear it and sometimes you don't.
Mm-hmm.
But there's that unfinished business that may fuel, or just the fact that maybe somebody's private and they just don't have that conversation. And so that leads to an emotional conflict of some kind where they're trying to be energized and may even come across as enraged because they feel so bad. And part of the art of all this care is to figure out how to depressurize it. And I think that that's one of the great things about concierge care advisors, is to help take some of that pressure relief off. And I think, again, that makes it better for everybody, which in the end always makes our jobs easier.
Right. Appreciate that. We have someone at the hospital came in, I believe it was over the Memorial Day weekend, and the lady is alert and oriented, but no power of attorney. She said there's no family that she wants to get a hold of because she's private. And 3 days have gone by and not a lot of activity. And so when our advisor got on the case, she noticed that there was a daughter's phone number. And she went to the senior and said, "Can I please call your daughter? I don't feel right not letting your next of kin know what's going on." The daughter got a phone call. The first phone call she got, had no idea mom was in the hospital for 3 days, because the senior has a right, obviously, not to contact next of kin. She's on a flight tonight at 10 p.m. They're going to go out and look tomorrow. The mother, of course, is agreeable, and we would have never called without her permission, but very happy to have her daughter, be engaged. But I think clearly what you had said also is that the seniors are so private that sometimes they don't want their adult children to be burdened with what's going on. So it makes it even harder on the neglect side.
And in a way that gave her permission.
Yes.
And again, I think that there's going to be 1,000 different solutions. There's no really one standard solution, but if there's permission given by that, just by nature of that support of I feel better, then it becomes a lot easier to sort of clear the table and start fresh. Whatever was keeping that from happening.
Right.
When we first connected, I was impressed about the team concept that you guys use to take care of patients, and that's why I became part of your organization. And it reminded me of what I've done in hospice, because in hospice we have a spiritual counselor, we have a social worker, we have nurses, we have home health aides. They all come in and they have a meeting with the family and the patient and find out what their needs are, and are there to support them on a 360 basis. And when we talk about abuse or neglect, there's many times that we've gone in and cared for somebody who we thought was failing in healthcare and life, and all of a sudden they rally and they come back.
Failure to thrive, right? Yeah.
And they next thing you know, they're sparky and they're back up to normal. And then from a hospice perspective, we pull services out, right? So it's kind of neat to see that, how with a team approach to care, and that's been proven over and over and over all throughout the world. And unfortunately, sometimes we don't take that approach to care, which really makes a big difference in people's lives.
And that's hard, because I think that patients, families, the public look at us and they want data, they want numbers. And the data side of me would love to have an ability to quantitate that tool, because we have seen it over and over again. And by not being able to put a number on it, we're really doing a disservice to reflect the value and importance of all those things. That, yes, we can provide great support with, the right antibiotic and the right medicine and so on and so forth, but our outcome is enhanced clearly when all that's better. And so one of my rules as a surgeon has always been, when someone feels like they're in a better place, whether even if they're just nervous about surgery, the more we put all that to bed and at rest, the better they do. And again, if we could have a number on that, I think we could help further the value, because I don't think it's as valued as it should be.
No, it's a touch point that there's no data on.
Yeah. Well, it's so important. And on the neglect side, I think when someone's not being changed, their briefs, or they're not being showered, or, you don't have that regular hygiene, I think some people don't realize that that's also neglect.
It is, and it only takes a moment of neglect to create days or weeks of an unnecessary burden. For example, just somebody who doesn't move in bed and doesn't get rotated regularly, or their briefs don't change. Next thing you know, they may have a pressure ulcer on their bottom or on their heels, and that's extremely debilitating and absolutely 100% preventable with just a touch of care. It's significant.
It can be life-changing because you go through that failure to thrive like you talked about. And we see that a lot with seniors is they get into a controlled environment where they get their regimen of their food and their medicine and getting up at the same time every day. And then someone says, oh my gosh, look how great they're doing, and let's get them out of here because I want to take them home. And they don't understand it's just because everything is in place and, working well.
Yeah, my recommendation to families is to stop and ask. Just ask the questions, because many times when you ask the questions, people realize that you're involved.
And you care.
Just ask, what can I do to help?
Yeah.
Is there anything that I can do to assist? And just sit and be present. Many times that's all that's needed.
Yeah.
And if there is a concern, then obviously take it to the right person, especially if it's in a facility. And many times it's viewed as helpful.
Absolutely. And it could just be a perception that someone is being neglectful, or could be resistant to care, or, the family came in and they're not being changed, but someone was just in 5 minutes ago and they were, resistant, and they're going to try again 5 minutes later. So I think a lot of times just open communication is the best. And adult seniors, what we have found is they don't want to burden their family. Sometimes they get manipulated by people that want to become their POA, whether it's financial or medical. But I think what you said, Dr. Alex, is stay engaged. Stay engaged with your family members, ask questions. We found ourselves with my husband's father being respectful. He was an hour and a half on the other side of the water, and so we would only go over if we could get a hold of someone. And of course, everything seemed great when we could get a hold of someone, but it was like making a 3-week appointment. When we would just drop in, we would go, oh my gosh, what are we doing here? So we got him out of there very quickly. But it didn't take us very long to figure out, if they don't answer the phone, you should probably head over and just see what's going on.
Yes.
So I think that's advice that we could give everyone, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
With Department of Social Health Services, which is dshs.wa.gov, that's where we can report any abuse. And their phone number is 877-734-6277, which is the APS, Adult Protective Services. And I think everyone would be really surprised on perhaps what DSHS says is abuse. So what I tell our staff is, when in doubt, report. And then we're all going to be more, safe. So anything else you want to add on this subject?
No, I'm curious, though, to hear your perspective on what you see as some of the best situations where, when they come to you and this doesn't happen, what do you see as they have in common? Are they more organized? They had those conversations?
I think kids are more involved. I think it's not, hey, my dad had somebody that moved in that was a caregiver. She's been a caregiver for 2 years. Now she's the power of attorney. So I think the engagements of the family, not friends of a friend of a friend, or people that are out of state that don't have family here, I think it's much better to go through a care manager, to have someone that's going to manage your parents, pick up the phone, let you know what's going on, dealing with the doctors, dealing with home health, and not just a friend that maybe you met at the bank. The lady I shared earlier about Jennifer reaching out to the daughter, the next of kin on the paperwork is a maid at the hotel that she's been living at for the last year because her home's not safe. So it's like, okay, wait a minute here. So that was kind of a red flag for me to get somebody involved.
Yeah, very common.
Yes, very common.
Very common.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So thank you for your time today.
Absolutely.
And really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thank you.
And again, it's Concierge Care Advisors at www.conciergecareadvisors.com. Thank you again.
Thanks.